Okay, we are on the top of page Yud Amud Aleph, Tan Rabbanan. Okay, so we left off with a machloket between Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Eliezer, where Rabbi Yehoshua says that the waters that come down, they come down from Shamayim, that is their origin source, and Rabbi Eliezer says that the origin source of the waters is from down below, and they rise up, and that's where they come from. But the origin actually comes from down here. So the Gemara is going to digress, and then we're going to come back to it in just a bit. We're on page Yud Amud Aleph 10a1, if you're following in the art scroll. Tarabanan, Eretz Israel Nevrat Tehila. Eretz Israel was created first. V'chol ha'olam kulo nevra lebasof, and the rest of the world was created afterwards. Shneimar ad lo asa eretz v'chutzot. Ad lo asa eretz v'chutzot Amonai melech. Right? Okay. So the fact that it divides eretz, land, v'chutzot, and the outskirts means that there is a central part of the land, and then there's chutzot, the outskirts of the land, the secondary part of the land. So therefore, we see that there was the land that was created, and then there was something else that was created after that. So the Gemara understands that when we say eretz, what are we referring to? If you refer to something in its titular quality, right? So you say man, or the man always means the man. So which of the lands is the most revered and is the most respected, specifically by the scripture that's quoting the land over here? Obviously, it's Eretz Israel. So Eretz Israel was created first, and after that, the rest of the earth, v'chutzot, was created. Eretz Israel, mashke ota, the land of Eretz Israel, mashke ota kadosh baruch hu be'atzmo. God Himself brings the rain to it. Chol ha'olam kulo, and the rest of the world, ayidei shaliach, happens through an intermediary. In fact, the pasuk says about the land of Israel, Eretz, the land, asher enei Hashem elokecha ba, the eyes of your God are upon it, bereshit hashana, from the beginning of the year, ad aharit hashana. Interestingly enough as well, this direct interaction of the rain coming from God in the land of Israel was meant to be associative with the concept and the process of emunah that the Jewish people were supposed to be receiving. So as an example, when they lived in Egypt, the nature of Egypt was such that the water did not come from the heavens. Where does the water come from to irrigate the fields in Egypt? It comes from the Nile. The Nile overruns. They created these troughs, these little pits and ditches that would store the water and bring it into the earth as it overflowed. And then when it went back to its banks, all the Fertile Crescent was watered by the waters of the Nile and the Euphrates. So what's interesting to me is that they move from Egypt, where they are literally idolaters, and they never have to look up, because the process does not happen via rain. It happens via the Nile. They move through the desert where there's no rain whatsoever to a place where they have to rely completely on the rain. So they go from the Nile providing the water to they're a miraculous source of water, i.e. the Be'er Miriam, the well of Miriam that travels with them. And then they get ultimately to rain falling from the heavens, illustrating the journey, if you will, where a person understands that the water comes from the earth itself, it's a natural cause, all the way across to understanding that the rain that comes from the heaven is also a miraculous cause. That was the idea of the Jewish people living in the land of Israel, where the rain is in the hands directly of God and doesn't even come through an intermediate, through a malach. The Gemara in the end of Baba Batra says that when a person moves from Israel to the lands of the diaspora, domeh ki'ilu she'en lo Eloha, it's as if he does not have a God. And the Maharsha explains over there, what does that even mean? Well, you think God is limited? Oh, he has an Israeli passport with no visa? He can't travel to the Chutz La'aretz? And the Maharsha explains that as compared to the direct receiving relationship that we have from God when we live in Israel, to receive through an intermediary in Chutz La'aretz feels domeh. It's as if en lo Elokai. It feels like I have no connection to God directly Himself. Shinei Amar. Where do we know that this is the case? That God, so to speak, interacts, waters Israel directly versus through an intermediary in Chutz La'aretz. Shinei Amar. Hanoten matar al pnei aretz. He places matar, rains on aretz. Again, the same concept that when it says aretz, if it differentiates between aretz and other places, chutzot, then the illustration is such that eretz is the most important of the lands, chutzot is the rest of them. So he places matar al pnei aretz, v'sholech mayim, but he sends water up pnei chutzot on the lands of all of the other places. So you see, it is being sent to the other places, but it is being given to the land of Eretz Israel. Okay? Sorry, what were you asking?
No, it's people say Aretz now. Like, they're talking about
going to the Aretz.
Right.
Yeah, exactly for the same reason. Okay?
Is it the sending the water mean the shaliachs?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you see that we use the word, instead of giving, sending. Giving is immediate.
Right.
Sending is through another party. Okay. The Gemara continues. Eretz Israel shoteh meg shamim. Eretz Israel drinks the water of rain. V'chol ha'olam kulo mitamtzit. And the rest of the world receives tamtzit, that which is left over, the extras, if you will. Shinei Amar, like it says, Anoten matar al pnei aretz. Hashem gives rain al pnei aretz, on the face of the earth. Vegomer, and it continues like we said just now. V'sholeach mayim, v'sholeach, and he sends v'sholeach mayim al pnei chutzot. Why is it referring to the immediate waters and the leftovers? Because it uses a different word for the waters of Eretz Israel, where it says matar, which is associated with rain, and then it uses another word, mayim, when it comes to what the rest of the world gets. So there's a qualitative difference in the water of Eretz Israel versus all the rest of the waters that come everywhere else. Mashal, says the Gemara, Eretz Israel shoteh techila, last one. Eretz Israel drinks first, and everyone else receives in the aftermath. Obviously, one way of looking at this would be chronologically, but what we're really referring to over here is a cause and effect. So, if, as an example, Eretz Israel merits, the way I understand this, the Gemara tells us that if the nations of the world would have known how precious the Beit HaMikdash is, not to us, but for them, the Gemara says this, they would have surrounded the Beit HaMikdash with soldiers and not let any of the other nations touch it. We use our Beit HaMikdash not only for the good and the benefit of the Jewish people, but also for the good and benefit of all the nations. As an example, on Sukkot, we bring 70 korbanot, one for each nation. We pray for the welfare of the whole world. So the beracha, Eretz Israel shotah techila, drinks first, and everyone else in the aftermath. That also can be a concept, not chronologically, but perhaps within the realm of causality. Okay. Shinei Amar, again, like it says, God places the rain on the earth, on Eretz Israel, and then Sholeach Mayim, everyone else gets sent the water afterwards. Mashal, the Gemara brings an example of what this is like. Le'adam shemigabel tagebina, the person who's mixing, who's squeezing, who's churning the cheese. Notelet ha'ochel u'meniach et ha'psolet. He takes the part that's curdled, that's become the cheese, that's become the cream, and he leaves over the watery, the skim, the leftovers in the churning basket. So too, also Eretz Israel. Eretz Israel receives the best, the quality of mayim, and everyone else receives something else. They receive leftovers. Amar Mar, our rabbi taught, Mematkin hen be'avim. Amar, he says, the Gemara explains, the bitterness of the waters that rise up into the heavens, Mematkin become sweetened be'avim, in the clouds. Minale, ask the Gemara, how do you know? Now the Gemara is going to bring a pasuk for this, but I always found that really interesting, because what the Gemara is actually asking sounds strange. How do you know that the rainwater is sweetened in the clouds? You know what the answer is? You ever taste rainwater? If you take a cup and you leave it out and the rainwater collects, it doesn't taste like the ocean. Now we know scientifically that the water that evaporates from the ocean is what then comes back down, on in the rain. So why is rainwater not salty? Sorry? So the Gemara says that the salt water is sweetened in the clouds. That's the concept. When it comes back down, it now comes down, ya'ani, bitter or salt free. Now,
why is
actually,
it rainwater then?
Sorry?
Why is it referred to as ocean water, not rainwater? Like next step.
I don't understand the
There's
question.
the salty waters of the ocean.
Right. So, but isn't it referring to the rain that's coming down? So the water. Why wouldn't it be? I guess it already did the.
Explain. I'm just explaining the question.
It already did the process.
The purification
down,
process.
Right, so it didn't have to. It's saying the water that starts from the ocean that goes up to the cloud. That's what it's referring to.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, what's interesting to me is actually, if you take a look at this scientifically, why would we scientifically say, before we get to the pasuk that tells us why that this is the case, why do we scientifically say, you look remarkably like me, Emmanuel, every time I look at you. Your face is exactly in the spot of the camera. So when I look at you, I just see myself. Unless I kind of do that, right? You might want to move a little bit to the right or to the left. Unless you're writing notes or on the phone during class.
Not on the phone.
I know. Scientifically, how does this work? Why, if you ask the scientists why rainwater is not salty, what will they tell you? Is it the clouds that sweeten the water? No.
It's just the ocean that's salty.
No, so therefore?
Therefore, the water is.
The process of evaporation evaporates the water. It doesn't evaporate the salt and the impurities and whatever else is there. Right? So what ascends, if you will,
water.
is only water. So what is it?
Salt staying there.
So what does the Gemara mean that the saltiness is sweetened by the clouds? When it comes out of the ocean, it comes out sweet.
Right.
So one of the ways I understand this is that the process of, so is the Gemara wrong? When the Gemara says that, that the bitterness, mematkinhem ba'avim, gets purified or sweetened in the clouds?
It's a story. It's nice. It's allegorical.
Allegorical. So one way of looking at it is allegorical, but I always like to, if I can, create a symmetry between what we know to be scientifically true and what the Gemara is saying. Okay?
Yeah.
So you know what the answer is?
Yes.
We're referring to the evaporation process, which is water turning into vapor. That's how it ascends. So the minute it leaves the ocean, it's in its cloud form.
Uh-huh.
So that, if you understand it like that, then the Gemara is literally saying the process of avim is mematkin mar, is that which eliminates the bitterness from the waters of the ocean. Minale. By the way, this is one of the ways that they, if I'm not mistaken, this is one of the ways that they drink water on ships. Is that they boil it, they capture the vapor, and then they cool it. They cool the vapor becomes water again. So they're literally taking salt water, and how do they get it? How do they get rid of it? If you boil it, what will happen? It will disappear. But if you catch the vapor, if you have something that catches the vapor, and then you cool it, in fact, you should just know, just as an aside, because I am a little bit of a geek, this is part of some of the systems that you have in your houses. There are steam things in your basement that heat your house. Right? You familiar with this? Cheapest way to heat your house is not gas or electric. Cheapest way is steam. So what happens? It takes the water, it heats it up to the point where it gets into steam, and then that's what is effectively coming through your pipes all throughout the house, correct?
Yes.
But what's interesting is that down below in the basement, now when you stop needing that, there's residual steam that steam then cools. And what do they do with that water? That can ruin the machine. So some of the old ones, what they do is they drain it. You have to drain it every other week. The more advanced machines actually have something built in that just basically takes that water, funnels it right back in, so that there's no process, there's nothing lost in the process, if you will, throughout that situation. Okay, let's carry on. The Gemara asks, Minale, 3 lines down from the wide lines. The Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef. Rabbi Yitzchak the son of Yosef said, Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Rabbi Yochanan, Ktiv chashkat mayim ave shachakim. This is very interesting, okay? We find this idea in a few places in the Torah. So let me give you an example of this place first. I'll tell you what this place is, and then we'll go to a similar case where we also find the same logic applied. The song David HaMelech, when he's being saved from his enemies, which is a common theme throughout the Elim, right? In fact, we have this idea, the song of David, Beborcho Lifnei Avshalom Eno. This is the song of David when he was running away from Avshalom, his son. The song of David when he was captured, by the Philistines. The song of David, right, he lived a very dramatic life. Okay, so David HaMelech, this is almost the exact same song, the exact same words appear in Tehillim, and they also appear in the story of David's life. Whereas Tehillim is what he wrote as his prayers, as his poetry to God. But where do we read about David? Where does David appear in Tanakh? In Shmuel. Excellent. So Shmuel Aleph anoints the first king as King Shaul. The second king is King David. So the story of King David appears there. Now, one of the bits that's identical is we read in the story of his life the song that he sang at that time. And in that song, which is, again, used as a chapter in Tehillim, it's almost word for word. There's very, very few differences between the two. One of the discrepancies between the two is that it says in Tehillim, Chashkat Mayim Aveh Shachakim. The darkness, from the word Choshech, of the waters, Aveh Shachakim, is in the thickness of the clouds. Okay? Uchtiv, and in Shemuel, it says, Chashrat Mayim Aveh Shachakim. So effectively, what you're looking at is a difference between a resh and a chaf. So for a second, let's not think about the letters themselves.
Yeah.
Let's think about the structure of the letter. What does a resh look like? A resh looks like this, right? It goes like this and it goes down. What does a chaf look like? Same exact thing. It just has an extra leg. So it's almost as if that last piece was forgotten. We didn't write that last line, the bottom of the resh, which turns it into a chaf. We didn't write that line. So there's two parts, two times where we say almost identical. One time it talks about the darkness of the rain, okay, the darkness of the waters, and one time it talks about chashrat mayim, which means the straining properties of a sieve, as an example. So chashrat mayim aveh shachakim. The Gemara says, so if there's two things, and if you would overlay them, they're almost identical. It must be that those two things really are meant to overlap. Where do we find that idea? What you're going to see in the Gemara here is very unique in the Gemara, what's about to happen. But I want to give you the idea where it's coming from. There's also two Pesukim in the Torah that do almost the same thing. Anyone know where? In Devarim and in Shemot. A couple weeks ago we read.
Shabbat.
Excellent. When it comes to Shabbat, in the Luchot, in the first place, in one place it says Zachor, et Yom HaShabbat lekadesho, remember the day of Shabbat. The other place it says Shamor. So which one was it? Both of them, it's not like the Torah is randomly saying, they're referring to the same thing. So which one was it? And the Gemara says, what do we learn from that? Actually, it wasn't Zachor or Shamor, which God said when he gave the Aseret HaDibrot. What was it? It was both. He said both of them at the same time. So one time we relate the first instance of what God said, Zachor. The second time when we're repeating it in Devarim, we say the second instance of HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying over the second word that he said. And in fact, it's so interesting when you find an idea in Torah, and then you find it in something that you already know, like you know from the time you were a child. Where do we say this?
Friday, Kavanat Shabbat.
Shamor ve'zachor b'dibur echad. God said Shamor and Zachor b'dibur echad, in one speaking.
Didn't Hashem
Simultaneously, it was like stereo. You heard Shamor here, Zachor here. God said the same thing at the same time. Okay? So, what do we learn from that? Not that it's this one or this one, but rather that it's this one and this one. Shamor teaches you the negative commandments about Shabbat. Zachor teaches you the positive commandments about Shabbat. But both of them are meant to overlap and to communicate something together. So what the Gemara is going to do over here is going to attempt to do that, but perhaps in a more creative and maybe visual way. Go ahead, Mars, what are you going to ask?
No, it's okay.
Okay, so we've got chashkat mayim and we've got chashrat mayim. Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, K'tiv chashkat mayim aveshechakim, u'k'tiv chashrat mayim aveshechakim. Shkol chaf, take the chaf, v'shadi aresh, and put it in front of the resh of chashrat mayim, v'kari be, and put them together and read it, chakashrat. What the heck is that?
Overlap. It's overlapping.
It's overlapping,
Yeah.
right? So it's chashrat, right? And it's, sorry?
Chachsharat.
Chashchat and chachsharat. Now, again, I must point out, the first example is chaf, shin, chet, shin, chaf. The second example is chet, shin, resh. There is never an occurrence of chaf, of chet, chaf, shin in either word.
Right.
So what game are we playing here? And Rabbi Yochanan, by combining all the letters together, what does he get? He gets hachsharat. Now, by the way, chachsharat also means nothing. It's only if you take the chet, which is a soft sound. That's why Ashkenazim, sorry guys, pronounce this wrong. A chet is not a sound that's meant to be a hard sound. That's a chaf. A het is said actually, I don't know if you ever noticed this. We say het. What does Ashkenazim say? Ches. Chala.
Like
We say
like Haifa.
hala.
Like Haifa.
Right? Haifa or Haifa.
Chet is supposed to be softer.
Softer.
How about a kaf?
Kaf is
Or
chaf is okay? Now, this is really interesting. Why do we pronounce it differently than them? Because chet, a chet in Sephardic pronunciation, is not pronounced with the throat. It's not here. It's het. Chet is a hairball.
That's
Okay.
why, like, when in English, sometimes people send you a message and they say Chodesh Tov, not Chodesh Tov. Like
Million examples.
Yeah.
Is it Happy Hanukkah or Happy Chanukah? Is it Farchi or Farhi? No one knows how to spell my name.
But a height is from the throat.
Sorry? Sorry?
A height is from the throat.
Correct. The breath emanates. But it's not a muscular throat sound. Is squeezing. Sorry?
It's called an ot geronit.
100%. Because it comes through the throat. As opposed to mem, which is pronounced with your lips. Or a sound, shin, which is on your tongue. The het is breath that comes from inside and through your throat. But it's not the process of squeezing the muscles of the throat to produce a sound from there. So make a het. You hear? Het, there's no constriction of the muscles of the throat. Chet is literally condensing the palate above the throat to be able to produce a sound. You're actually making a Ashkenaz chet more with the back of the roof of your mouth than you are with your throat.
Right.
Okay? So, chachsharat means nothing. But since a het is a soft sound, it's associative and actually interchangeable with a hey. And in fact, there's quite a few letters that we actually say are letters that are interchangeable. Bet, vav, mem, pei, boomf. Okay? Those four letters are interchangeable.
The old SYs
Yeah?
never said het like that. They said like you said.
Het.
Yeah, they're very light.
Light.
Like Hayim.
Hayim.
They wouldn't say Chayim.
No. Right.
Hayim.
So
I
it's,
never realized why.
my point is that now you see how interchangeable a chet and a hey are.
There we go.
Because it's almost identical.
Transition.
Okay? So hachsharat or chachsharat, right, is very similar. So what does hachsharat mean? It means the preparation In fact, what do we call when a person gets ready for a mitzvah? What's that called? So as an example, let's say I want to do Brit Milah on Shabbat. Mutar asur. Mutar on the 8th day.
Yeah.
Okay? Because the process of Milah is allowed to supersede Shabbat. Because the Pasuk says that you do the Brit Milah on the 8th day. On the 8th day, no matter what day that day is. Okay? However, what if the Mohel decides he wants to sterilize the knife? So he wants to boil water to sterilize his knife.
Hechsher.
That's hechsher mitzvah. That's not mitzvah. So doing the milah itself is actually breaking Shabbat. Because you're putting a chabura, you're causing blood to come out. So that's mutar. Hechsher mitzvah is not. So let's say he needs to carry his knife from wherever to wherever. He needs to do it for the milah. Mitzvah? No. That's hechsher mitzvah. Hechsher is the preparation for something. So therefore, when you combine these two things, what are you left with? Hachsharat ma'im aveshachakim. The preparation, the koshering, the betterment of the water, aveshachakim, happens in the clouds. So you see that the idea of the mar, of the bitterness of the water being prepared, filtered almost through the process of vaporization, is actually, it comes out from the Pesukim itself. Now, let's go back to this now. I found this fascinating, but again, this is my own interpretation. What was the difference between the chashchat and we said chashrat? The rish is like this. The chaf is like this, correct?
Yep.
The dish is open.
The rish, excellent,
Come on.
is open down to the bottom. So effectively, what David HaMelech is illustrating to you is that the difference of this thing at the bottom. What does this look like? This is the ocean. This is the process of the waters going up. This is the clouds that come back down. So Hachsharat, he communicates this idea to you by the elimination of the bottom of the letter. Now, I did not see this in the Gemara, but I am sure it is Emet, because he literally illustrates it by eliminating the bottom layer, which is the rivers, the red waters of the ocean, and that's referring to you, that's communicating that Hachsharat Mayim, the Mar Mematkinen Be'avim. Literally, it's the shape of the letter is the upper, the line between the upper and lower, and the lower. Okay, beautiful. Beautiful chidush for tonight. Now, let's carry on. Rabbi Yoshua, Es Gemara, Rabbi Yoshua, according to Rabbi Yoshua, Bahani Krai, my Darish Bu. How does he understand these Pesukim? Remember, Rabbi Yoshua holds that these waters, where do they come from? They come from the upper heavens. They don't come from down below. So how does he understand these Pesukim? Savarla, he holds, Kihad Chi'ata Ravdimi, when Ravdimi came to Eretz Israel, Amar, he said to Bavel, to Babylonia, Amar, he said, Ami b'Marava, they say in Eretz Israel, Marava in the west. Okay? Ami b'Marava, they say in the west, Nahor Anani Zeirin Mohi. If the clouds are light, Zeirin, there's a small, like Zeir, the Mohi, the waters are light. There's not going to be a lot of rain in them. Chashoch Anani, if the clouds are very thick, Sagiin Mohi, there's going to be a lot of rain in them. Now, we also understand now, why are rain clouds thick and gray? Come on, guys.
Oh, the clouds.
Where's the scientific knowledge here?
Oh, the clouds.
Why are rain clouds? There's the cumulus, right? There's all these, right? Which clouds, why are the rain clouds thick and gray?
They carry water in them.
They carry water in them. Now, he's telling you that this is a sign there's a lot of water.
Right.
But what does it mean they carry? All the clouds carry water in them. They're all vapor. They're made up of water. Remember what we said. How does the process go? How is this rain? How is water floating in the sky? Why does it not fall? The answer is because the molecules are, there's a width between, there's space between these tiny particles of water held together in this giant vaporous cloud. So as it gets cold, more and more of that becomes water, right? And then that's when it comes down, when it's cooled to the point and they're close enough to be able to come together. So the winds that are holding up the clouds are now no longer strong enough to be able to stop the gravity and the weight of the combined water. In a gray water cloud is a cloud which has less space between the water molecules. It's denser.
Density.
And since it's more dense, why is it darker? Because it doesn't refract light as well. That, as it's obvious.
Yeah.
So the darkness of the cloud literally illustrates the density of the water.
Now you know this from the Gemara.
I know I'm a very curious man.
Natural history.
I like to learn a lot of things about a lot of things. Okay,
Yeah.
let's carry on. You're wondering if there's another handbook I have.
No, I'm saying
Well,
did
the
you learn
science
that
is
in
the bottom.
school and in science or?
Yeah.
I like to read a lot. I'm a curious fellow. Okay, carries on the Gemara. So therefore, what does it mean? What does that mean? How do we answer the question? The question was, what does Rabbi Yehoshua?
Question.
The question was, what does Rabbi Yehoshua do with this pasuk? Because the pasuk illustrates clearly that the waters are coming from above. Correct?
Right.
So Rabbi Yehoshua, they're coming from below, because they're
said
fixed.
below, right.
They're fixed by the clouds as they go up into the clouds. So according to Rabbi Yehoshua, what does he do? What does he do with that? And the Gemara then told us as an answer that he goes according to Rav Dimi, that says that the waters, if the clouds are thick, if the clouds are thin, if they're dark, if they're light, how does that answer this question? No?
Because Rabbi Yeshua says it's coming from the upper waters. And
Okay.
Eliezer was coming from.
Well, that's the holds coming from the waters below. This idea that everything is being fixed as it goes up into the heavens, that seems to be clearly according to Rabbi Eliezer. So how would Rabbi Yehoshua understand this pasuk?
Was it the two types of rains that he would say?
What do you
A
mean?
light rain and a heavy rain? Could he say that?
Again, that would not help this problem. The problem is that the Pesukim say Chashchat Mayim and the Pesukim say Chashrat Mayim. So what does he do with those two Pesukim now? What Rabbi Eliezer does is he explains together the processes, like we said earlier, that it's a fixing of the waters that come from below to the top. So now we have an understanding according to Rabbi Eliezer. According to Rabbi Yehoshua, that's not the process. So what does he do with that? What does he do with that Gemara? I want to see if anyone caught what just happened.
Hold on.
Nope.
Hold on.
The answer is the Gemara did not answer this. Gemara did not answer this. What the Gemara did was it chose one of the Pesukim to interpret, and it says that that's how Rabbi Yehoshua is going. Chashchat Mayim, which means the darkness of the waters, right? Avesh Shechakim, he says that Rabbi Yehoshua has a pasuk that says the darkness of the waters is in the clouds, in the thickness of the cloud. He says that means that when there's a thickness in a cloud, when it's dark, that means that's how you know that there's a lot of water there. So he goes with the first pasuk that we read, Chashchat Mayim. What's he going to do with the other one, Chashrat Mayim, that we then combined into Hachsharat Mayim? He doesn't learn like that at all. Rabbi Yehoshua he goes with Chashchat Mayim. What does he do with the pasuk that says that it's a sieve then, if he's not combining the two? The answer is, he already said earlier, that when the Gemara said before that it comes through a sieve, right? Rabbi Yehoshua said, it's not that it comes through the sieve, so in other words, in terms of its origin. It's just that the way it comes down is as if, like when it rains, it's like someone was pouring a big, like if you took a big bottle of water, you poured it into a sieve, how would it come out in many? So the rain looks like it came through the sieve. So he basically, what he does is he sidesteps the Chashrat Mayim. He's left with the Chashchat Mayim now because he's not putting them together. He then interprets the Chashchat Mayim according to Rav Dimi that says that the darkness of the cloud illustrates the presence of much water.
But he said the water emanates from the heavens.
Correct.
So you're saying because Rav Dimi said that the clouds are dark and thick, that it emanates from there?
No, that gives him an explanation to explain the
As in why it
pasuk
comes
of
down?
Chashchat Mayim. What do we mean when we say the darkness of the waters is in the clouds? is over Shekakim.
That's a dark cloud.
So if you're interpreting it that it's coming from the waters below, okay. But if you're not interpreting that, how do you interpret it? So he says, Chashchat Mayim, the darkness of the water, in other words, the darkness of the cloud illustrates the content of the water in it. So he's interpreting that pasuk, that gets him out, get out of jail free card. Now he's got the other pasuk, Chashchat Mayim. Well, he already explained that earlier, that it's not that it comes through a sieve, but it just looks like what it would look like if you put water through a sieve, which means that it comes down in the many drips.
Forensic.
Sorry?
I have
It's
to
too
read this again.
forensics. It's too.
I
I know
know
it's
Have a
called.
good
It's
night.
called.
Thank you.
God bless you.
I don't
Okay?
understand.
You don't understand?
No, I mean, I understand. It's too sourcing of
One more time. Let me explain very clearly. We have two Pesukim. They seem to say the same word, but just off by a little. Rebbe Eliezer has a beautiful explanation where he puts the two of them together, and then it emerges a third word, Hachsharat, which fits with his opinion, which says that the water rises from above. And look, what happens is it gets processed, cleaned, yani, and it comes down sweet.
Right.
Got it? Okay.
Yes.
The second opinion now has two Pesukim. What does Rabbi Yoshua do with these Pesukim? Now, he's not tied to the way the other rabbi learned, because he's allowed to learn it differently.
Correct.
But he has to interpret the Pesukim themselves.
Correct.
And the Pasuk seems to talk about clouds and water.
right.
So he says, let me explain that to you the way Rav Dimi does.
Got it. I get
That
it
the
now.
darkness is not in the water, it's referring to the darkness of the cloud. And that illustrates the quantity of water in the cloud.
Density, right.
So they asked him, okay, sidebar. What about the other pasuk, Chashrat Mayim? The answer is, okay, I told you that one already. That when it comes through a sieve, then the rain looks like it was divided into many different drops that are coming out on the other side. Okay, let's carry on. Let's see if we can just finish this piece. Okay. Azla Hadetanya, come on, Azla. Ask the Gemara. Kiman Azla Hadetanya. Who is it going to? This that it says in the Braita. We've now turned the page in the
10A2.
10A2. If you're following, we're right at the top of the gray line on the Hebrew side of the page. If you want to follow.
New point.
Kiman, yeah. We're going back to the Machlok Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer. Kiman Azla. Who is it going to? According to Hadetanya, this that it says in the Braita, Maim ha'elyonim, the upper waters, b'ma'amar hem tiluim, are dependent on the word of God. Uperotehem, and what is the fruit of these things? What is the process, the result? Meg shamim is the waters of the rain. Shneimah, like it says in Pi ma'asecha tisba'aretz, from the fruit of your deeds, the land is satiated. Right? So we just found a Gemara that seems to say that there's mayim elyonim. The waters are up above, and God decides when to send them down. Kiman, who does it go according to? Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua holds that the waters emanate from the heavens. Rabbi Eliezer, what does Rabbi Eliezer say according in this Braita? Now, let me just make this clear. Does Rabbi Eliezer need to figure out how to fit with the Braita? No. Why? Because Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua are both Tanaim. Remember we talked about this in the beginning?
Yeah.
So a Tana does not have to justify that a Mishnah disagrees with him. He is on the level of a Mishnah. So he could argue with a Mishnah. If an Amorah, if the next generation down, you find a Mishnah against him, he's toast. Unless he could find another Mishnah that says like him, because it's above his pay grade, okay? So when the Gemara is asking who the Braita is going according to, it's not like a knockout punch to Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. All it is it's saying is, does this Braita have to go according to Rabbi Yoshua, or is there a way for us to make it fit also according to Rabbi Eliezer? The Gemara answers, Rabbi Eliezer, what would Rabbi Eliezer say? We're referring to over there is not the standard rains, the rains of every Monday and Thursday. We're referring to over here is the rains in their initial inception, in their incarnabular moment, when they are first brought into existence. That rain, where did it emanate from? And that is the Mayim Elyonim. Ma'aseh Yadav Shakadosh Baruch Hu Dichtiv. Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, Kol ha'olam kulo mitamtzit gan Eden hu. The entirety of our world comes from the leftovers, from that which emanates from Gan Eden, hu shoteh. It drinks from there. Shne'emar, like the pasuk says in Bereshit. It's fascinating because you read this in Bereshit all the time, you never notice it. And I remember the first time someone pointed it out. The pasuk says, "V'nahar yoseh me'Eden," and a river came out from Eden, And that river that came out from Eden, this is one of those examples where the Gemara vegomers you, it etceteras you, but you really need to see the end of the pasuk. So look at the little vav on the side that takes you right over here down at the bottom. Can you see it over there? Right in the middle by the spine. V'nahar, you see the little vav? V'nahar. V'nahar yotze me'eden, and a river goes out of Eden. Lehashkot et hagan, to give, to service, to give the water, the gan, the garden to drink. Umisham yipared, and from there it splits. V'ayala arba rashim, and has into 4 heads. And what are those 4 heads? Those 4 heads are 4 major rivers. Nahar Perat, right? Chidekel, all the rivers that actually we're familiar with. So what we're actually referring to over here, on a certain level, is waters emanating from Eden to water the Gan, i.e. Gan Eden. And where does the pasuk say it goes from there? It goes and spreads out to the 4 major rivers that lead to humanity and to civilization. So the Gemara says, Tana mitamtzit bet kur shote tarkav. So this is a very interesting concept. Okay, why are we bringing this idea? Because up until this point, we've talked about this concept of the main source of water and the secondary source, and it's Israel, the rest of the world. We've talked about the rain coming from up above and coming to down below, or down below to up above and back down. So here we're bringing another example of where the water that feeds the world comes from, and the Gemara brings a pasuk that there's also a mystical and spiritual source to the waters of the world that come from Gan Eden. I've always thought this was really interesting. And again, I don't know if there's a deep Kabbalistic thought here, but I think there probably is. There's a Nahar Yotzei Eden. Where does the Nahar de Yotzei Eden go to? It goes to the Gan. In other words, it goes to Gan Eden. Right. What's in Gan Eden? 2 trees. It's Adat Tovara, the tree of knowledge, and it's a Chaim, the tree of life. The idea that water is the source of all life, perhaps it's because the Nahar that brings us that water passes through Gan Eden, touching the tree of life. Carrying this on, we also know that Mayim, water, is always a representation and is always a description that we use to describe what?
Fruit?
No, specifically, En Mayim Ela Torah. Mayim is a descriptive terminology for Torah. What other tree does the water touch before it comes to us? It's Adat, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So again, this is my own Kabbalistic interpretation on the Gemara, but what a fascinating idea. The Braita then continues and says, "Mitamtzit bet kor shote tarkev." What does that mean? There's a place called Bet Kor. What is Bet Kor? It's an area. It's a measurement of land. So we measure land. You don't measure land by feet, right? You measure land by acres, right? There's different specific measurement systems that we would use for different things that we're trying to measure. Bet Kor is a size of land. A size of land that it would take to be able to plant a certain amount of wheat or barley or a certain type of grain. So from the leftover of Bet Kor, what happens? Shote Tarkav, an area, a space of Tarkav drinks. It's able to receive its sustenance. Now, how much is this Tarkav that we refer to? That's obviously a much smaller area. Okay, so effectively, if you're talking about the Bet Kor being absorbing the majority of the water, and then the drainage or the leftover feeds a much smaller portion, what we then understand through that is that when you look at the rain that comes to Gan Eden and then comes to us, we're the much smaller part of the receptacle than that giant original area. Same too, Eretz Israel. Exactly. So everyone else, although it's much larger in size, much smaller in importance, and therefore the Gemara is bringing you a classic agricultural mashal or example to be able to help make you understand what this idea is of primary and secondary when it comes to waters. Let's continue next week from the 2 dots Ten Rabbanan.
Sunday?
Sunday, I have